Hey guys, welcome to our first monthly webisode.
Today we have our first guest speaker, Duff.
She's an experimental filmmaker
who also works with mediums such as photography and sculpture. Hope you enjoy.
An artist and an experimental filmmaker. Background really is through visual art, and I make film and video installations as an artist, really. More kind of what I work in might be called non-narrative, which is really looking at the structure of how we hold up meaning, not the meaning itself oftentimes, but just like how we construct meaning and how we hold it up. And so I come from what might be called structuralist film. It's not about entertainment, so sometimes it's really boring. Sometimes nothing happens. Actually, often in my films, nothing happens. But what I'm interested in really is kind of a kind of attention to what you could call the apparatus, like the things that make the film, the cameras itself, the film itself, the structure of the frame, and the elements of editing, how we actually sort of pull apart. For experimental filmmakers, we really started way back when, kind of trying to pull apart the conventions of manipulation. And in theater, you encounter this a lot too. It's kind of the Brechtian version of storytelling or whatever. It's like trying to look at, the reason being is you kind of look at the power structures that hold up what's telling you things. And for Hollywood, it would be like, what's making me feel so sad, or what's making me feel so angry? And experimental filmmakers like to pull that stuff apart. Like, that's like, I'm being manipulated. This isn't real. Pay attention to the fact that there's a man behind the curtain and he's making me feel things. So that's a long explanation, I guess, of kind of where I'm coming from, which may be a little, I'm saying that all up front because it might be a little different than what you're expecting. Because except for a couple of pieces, I don't typically make storytelling films. And I think, really because I was trained in fine art, we were trying to look at things a little bit differently and maybe more skeptically. So I came at it really, as I demonstrated to you guys, is more like, how come they're making it that way? How come, for example, something that a young filmmaker, like you guys, a young filmmaker might not notice unless you're studying, is how long Hollywood shots are and why they're a certain lengths. And that what happens if you hold it a little bit too long, like people get uncomfortable. It's really weird. It's like we want to move, right? So I will do that on purpose. It's like hold it much longer than you feel comfortable with. And it's because I've been indoctrinated via Hollywood movies that things are supposed to be this, like this. And I think kids coming through a conventional film program, like say at USC, where you're supposed to come out and be a Hollywood filmmaker, you just adopt the conventions without questioning. And then we're kind of lulled into the same old thing. So artists always say, like, let's, like, what's that? Who's controlling that? What's that about? What's underneath it? What happens if I stretch it a little bit or make it too short or too long? Or you guys should try it sometime, is hold your shot too long. And you may notice that it changes over time. For example, when I was teaching, over the years that I was teaching film, I used a Roman Polanski movie called Repulsion one year, and it's a conventional feature narrative film. And then about 10 years later, I showed it to another group, and they thought it was like crashingly slow. It was so boring, they couldn't stand it. It's the same movie. It was like 10 years before, it was like right on editing. 10 years later, after MTV came in.
Right.
It was really after MTV came in, and then we got used to cutting much faster. All of a sudden, it seems slow. So these conventions are so mutable and change over time. You can play with that too. Something you do tomorrow is going to look really different in 10 years or 20 years. You might as well mess with it now.
Right.
Yeah. As an artist too, is like what I always tell my students is, our job is to create a disturbance. not to make people comfortable, but to create a disturbance. So, and that may be just a little disturbance of like that was held too long, or that's weird, you know,
Right.
because it gets people thinking. That's the main thing. I want my viewers to think. I don't want them just to be lulled into, you know, a nice story or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
And playing with those boundaries and learning how to experiment like that is, first off, again, this is a safe place to do it. This is the right time to do it. This is the time when you have the freedom to do it. But also, even though it may not end up being how you make film, it will. I always say this when I'm teaching, like, you know, modernism, you know, there were these boundaries that maybe you don't want to go be, you know, a futurist or surrealist, but they were there to at least have you then redefine what is your, you know, what are your beliefs and why? Because if you don't know that, then you never, I just think it makes a difference.
Then you're like you're blind in the box, you know, and and for me, this is my kind of passion in like watching the effect that watching film has on me. And several of the films, I don't know how much you guys actually got to watch of my work, but there are several that are just these long shots silent. I mean, there's like catalog is just silent looking at a catalog, right? It's just, and I had been, you know, like paging through the catalog, and I stopped for a minute and I thought, these look like Hollywood. This looks like a Humphrey Bogart movie. Like Restoration Hardware had photographed their products to look like a movie. And I thought, why don't I just make a movie of the thing that this is a set for already, right?
Right.
But then when I was shooting it, so how long do I hold a shot? I used sort of anti-structuralist, actually. I used my own interest in the catalog as the structure. So I'd look at a page and hold the shot for as long as I was interested in that chair or whatever, and then I'd cut as soon as I lost interest. It wasn't about the viewer. It was about my own desire. And what I was documenting is the length of my interest. Which is pretty long, actually, because I look at things for a long time. And I really like their furniture. But it is a critique at the same time. It is sort of, as I'm looking at it, it's a kind of critique of what happens when we look at catalogs and the desire that's created when we look at products. And underneath it is sort of a critique of consumerism, really. That I'm implicating myself in that, though. I'm involved in this. I want that chair. I want to see how long it takes to look at it. Anyway, I don't want to get too complicated. So I wasn't trying to tell anybody's story. I was really just documenting what was actually happening in front of my. So when working that way, it makes you really conscious of all of the elements, everything in the frame, every little detail. It's black and white. So because I slow everything down, you have to look at the film grain. Every little thing that's happening becomes part of your consciousness. And maybe, I don't know, as an antidote to this short attention span that we're all experiencing now with, you know, so rapidly moving images, you know, you're just inundated with images, like thousands and thousands every day, that your grandparents probably saw, I don't know, some fraction of the number of images that you're seeing every day, or we all see.
Right.
Yeah, anyway, I wandered off from Anne's comment there. Yeah. But it really is, just to finalize that, it's about paying attention to every little thing. And to me, that's about being an awake human being. This like, so I'm not neither indoctrinated by the conventions, but also I'm enlivening my eyes and my body and you know, my interest in having time to look at something. Actually, that one thing, I write about that, I think, on my website, is I really wonder how long, in my films, I wonder how long it takes to look at something. Just that simple question, like how long does it take to look at this?
One of the first questions we wanted to ask was, what gave you the inspiration for some of your short films like The Gringas or The Water is Rising?
The Gringas is really, there's two pieces that are kind of exceptions to my more, the short films that are more a structural practice that I was talking about, the non-narrative. The narrative pieces, I do have them. Some Things About Water is one of them. I don't know if you looked at that one, but The Gringas is really a documentary. And that purely came, that I call it an accidental documentary. I didn't mean to make it at all. I just always walk around with a camera and I shoot whatever. It's really the way I practice is I just collect images and then I have like a catalog or library. I have a library of recordings, and then sometimes I go into the library then to create a piece. So I'm just constantly collecting. And the Gringas was, as you can tell from the piece, is that friends of mine here in Mexico, I just found them so interesting. They'd invite me to their pagan solstice celebration for every solstice. And I bring my camera, and they got used to me having the camera on them all the time for a long time. And then came this, I guess it was the summer, that they started talking about Lena's quinceañera coming up. And I was like, what's that? And they started, with my camera, they started telling me what it was and what was going to happen. And as in those first shots, as they're telling me about it, I'm thinking, I better keep shooting this. I better keep coming back and shooting this because something's about to happen. So I knew that there was a film unfolding, but of course, because it's a documentary, I couldn't plan it, storyboard it, or do anything but just be ready with my camera all the time. And fortunately, I know the camera so well, that particular camera, as you'll notice, everybody's kind of, they're looking at me, but the camera's down here, so they're looking over the lens, because I have the camera right here. And I know that camera so well, I don't even have to look through it. I just know what it shoots. And I would just hold it in front of my chest, or, kind of at my armpit, so that they could talk to me instead of to the camera lens and be very natural about it. And already they were so used to me carrying this camera around. And then after the quinceañera happened, I had to figure out what to do with that footage. And at that point, I knew I was going to turn it into a documentary. And then I had to design some shots a little bit more, like the one toward the end where Lena comes over to my house and we're looking at the pictures of the quinceañera. I had set that up because I knew I needed more footage to kind of finalize the thing. And then over and over again, I think over a period of a year, it was like, how do I finish this? What am I going to do? How do I finish this? And I, at a certain point, it was maybe a year later, I visit her and her boyfriend, now living together in a trailer, I guess. And I think I decided once I had the shot where he just talked about essentially that they were just committed to loving each other. And I thought, there's nothing more I can really add to this. I've got dogs. We got the dogs. We started with the dogs. We're ending with the dogs. And I just had to stop at that point. I did return and kept in touch with her over years after that, thinking maybe there's more I should add. I waited a while. And many other things did happen in her life, but I just had to stop at a certain point. That's why I call it accidental, because I had no plans making it. I barely had any plans finishing it. With a work like that, if you guys are doing documentary type work, you really have to let the subject tell you what the story is going to be. You have to let the subject tell you what the film is going to be. Right. It's impossible to control it. And I had to also be very mindful of I did not want to take advantage of my subjects. I didn't want to manipulate them into my ideas about how in order for me to make a film, I didn't want to manipulate them. I kind of had done that before in my life, and I really didn't want to be that kind of filmmaker out of respect for my subject. With the other piece that you asked about, I wrote it down. Oh, with the Water is Rising was just a one-night installation. And the image you see on that one is, I took a drone shot of the sea that I had made for Catalog Volume 3 that I made down here in Mexico. And I just took that water piece and projected it on a sheet on top of my garage. It was the beginning of COVID, and this was for a citywide art project called Drive By Art. And the organizers had artists put their art out on the street so people could drive by to see it. So there was no COVID transmission, right?
That's cool.
That is so cool.
And so it was cool. I realized that I don't really have a yard. I just have the garage and there's a sidewalk, but I have this terrific roof over my studio. And I bought a rear screen, something you could project from the rear, and built a structure to project that. And then I just made that piece specifically for that night. But my friend Annie Saunders, who is a experimental theater director and actor, came over to visit me that night, and I said, "You wanna do something in front of the?" So she did this this completely ad lib dance with the water in front of in the back of the screen there. So she was a silhouette. Yeah. That really just happened on the spot. No plans on that.
Yeah. I really liked that one. It was nice.
Thanks. And I really did too. It was a lovely experience.
Our next question was, what was the film that catapulted your career? Like, which film was it that you started to get super recognized, like, in the industry, I guess?
Oh, you guys are darling to imagine I've been catapulted. That's funny. I guess if I had any catapulting, it would have been years ago, really as a fine artist and as a sculptor, is I made my reputation, and I made my reputation first really in New York, making and showing sculpture. But I'd always made film. I started making film, like Super 8 film, when I was in high school, actually. So, and I'd been teaching video and film for years, but I hadn't actually made it in my own work until I guess this was in the early, maybe it was like, I think it was 2003 or 4. I decided I was going to be a little more serious about it. And I'd always struggled with, and you guys may know what I mean by this, I'd always struggled with being able to hold in my mind a whole piece that traveled over time. In other words, I was used to making sculpture and drawing and photography, worked a lot in photography, and I could make things sit still. But it was really hard for me to keep in my mind a plan that things would change through time. So same with photography, I just had to keep making it. Like with photography, I felt that I was just a lousy photographer, so I shot thousands of pictures. It took 2 years, and I just shot pictures until I became a good photographer. It's really, practice is really a thing. Just keep shooting. So even though I'd worked in film, and I even was a commercial director for a while, I still struggled with being able to see a thing in my mind over time. And the only antidote to that really was shooting like crazy. And like I said, this is when my practice developed of like constantly shooting. So I would then have a library of films, which I do now still. Instead of setting out to shoot a movie that had a beginning and middle and end, I would just shoot pictures, shoot images, shoot them in time, understand how time works in motion pictures. And also something that became really clear and important to me is that I do think of film as a three-dimensional medium. So it's very related to my sculpture work in that it takes place in space. It's not just moving, it's not moving pictures. It's something that takes place in space and time. And one of the big reasons that I really wanted to do more film and video is because I felt I had things to say that were beyond a single object or beyond a single picture. And as we have many voices in different mediums, but film is the one that's got the most dimension, where I can make pictures, I can make time, I can work with sound, and I love working with sound. That's also a huge part of it. So I made, like this morning, I had a recorder out in the backyard here recording the birds, because besides shooting video all the time, I also record sound all the time. So yeah.
Nice.
I wandered away from your question. Was that a good was that an answer?
No, that was good. You told us.
You get me talking, you know.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
Yeah.
Oh,
The catapult thing. Yeah, I became well known as a fine artist before film, and then I just sort of segued into film. Yeah.
The next question we have is, what was the first big event or place your work was showcased in, and how did it lead to that?
As far as film goes, I think that I could say that a piece that I made called "Some Things About Water," which I happened to make on a residency in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. I don't know, I guess when that piece, the year after I made it, that piece was included in, and I started submitting my work to film festivals. That was really the start of, and it was invited to screen at the Rotterdam Film Festival, which is a really big deal. It's a major film festival. And that kind of, I went, I attended the festival, I met other filmmakers, and that really sort of opened my eyes to this whole other world of the film festivals, which is really now where most of my work shows. And it's, in a way, the film festival circuit is kind of the only place that except for art venues and experimental film venues, the film festivals is where my kind of work is seen mostly. And then once that went to Rotterdam, I became much more aware of film festivals and people in them, and how I could participate in that sort of new circle. Yeah, that was in 2005. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay, 2005. This made me think of a new question. I think the festivals, are there a lot of, in your category, is there usually a lot of people who do what you're doing? Because I haven't really paid attention a whole lot, but yes, there's a lot, yeah.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
There really is.
I never thought about it, yeah.
And there are a lot of festivals that have an experimental section. And there are a lot of experimental film festivals that are entirely devoted just to experimental film. Yeah, and I've over the last number of years, I've really enjoyed becoming a participant with those. In particular, something like Alchemy Film Festival in Scotland, a small town in Scotland.
Oh.
I've participated a couple times. The last year and the year before, I did an installation. You may have seen on my website a two-screen installation with a sort of a tunnel from Iceland. That was installed in a basement of like a medieval building in this town in Scotland, which was perfect because it was cold and dark and spooky, and it was really perfect for that. 2 years before, I had the catalog series, which entirely different kind of sensibility, like up in the theater. But it's a real community. Like a lot of people, I've gotten to know a lot of people, and I see them at the same people at festivals, and I've gotten to know some of the directors. It's really a wonderful community, and it's so small that it's not so competitive. I think that's what I love about it, is that because their stakes are so small, like there's really no money in it. that the filmmakers are really supportive of each other. We really love each other's work, and we go to see each other's work, and we're not so much trying to compete for small potatoes, you know. Yeah. Yeah.
We're talking about a live opera.
Oh God, yeah. Yes. Yeah, in the works now. I just got just got a small award from the Los Angeles Cultural Affairs Department, where you submit proposals and they award artists, and could be filmmakers, music people, not theater so much, but it's becoming a little more expansive, dance people. And I'm working on a grant right now, and I'm really mulling over whether this is foolish or not. Is that the idea I had is for a live opera with an animated film. It's a I don't know how to describe this, and why it needs to be an opera. I guess I'm doing a version of Dante's Commedia where Virgil takes Dante down into the underworld, the Inferno, and Dante is the poet and Virgil is the guardian angel in a way, and shows him what's in the underworld. And I want my best friend Sabina died a couple of years ago, and that's what the project, What Does She See When She Shuts Her Eyes? That was a collaboration with her. She had done a project based on, that was structured like the Dante 3-part Commedia, the Divine Comedy. And so I decided that I was going to do a version of that, only Sabina was going to take me into the underworld, what I'm calling the afterworld, structured like Dante's Divine Comedy, only it will be a live chorus. I'm writing it in the same form that Dante wrote the Divine Comedy, which is called terze rima. It's a certain kind of rhyming scheme, which is really hard to do in English. And in the back, behind the singers, will be an animated film of 2 12-year-old girls, one Sabina and one me, that's going to animate her taking me down into the afterworld and then telling me where she is and what's going on down there.
That sounds so...
I know, it's crazy, isn't it? So I need to make an animated film. I have a group in LA. My husband's a musician and composer, and there's a group in LA that does, it's called C3 LA. They're composers, singers, it's chorus, and conductors, and they will do all three, doing the I won't ask them to compose maybe, but to conduct and to sing it. And then I just realized that I need a live drum line too. So so everything I'm thinking of, I need a live audience, and it's probably very, very poor timing to be planning such a thing as this. But maybe that's exactly why I'm thinking of it. I really miss a live audience, and there is still scheduled. There was a kind of retrospective of my films planned for a big venue here in LA called Red Cat. It's part of the Disney Hall. That was supposed to take place in May, and it was canceled because of COVID. Postponed. We're still planning to do sort of semi-live, semi-online this spring, holding our breaths to figure out when it will be that we can have live audiences again. And so many of these films, the catalog films in particular, really are meant to be seen on a big screen with other bodies in a dark space. They're not meant to be seen on this little thing. It takes a lot of concentration, and they're really, we have less and less, but the experience of being with other bodies, you know what I mean, Anne, it's like a theater, the experience of being with other bodies, participating really in what's going on in a live way is, I don't know of another way to represent it. I don't, we're doing the best we can with this. It feels like I'm in Texas talking to you guys. But I think that I'm planning this this maybe undoable thing at the moment, because I miss human bodies.
Mhm.
And for me, making films that have very, very little happening, when I want someone just to pay attention to the grain of the film, it needs to overwhelm the body. That's the point. It's bigger than me. You know, it's bigger than my body. And when it's on the small screen, it becomes boring because there seems to be so little to look at. There's actually tons to look at. It's just supposed to be.
Where do you want to see your work go in the coming years? Do you have a goal to get it shown in a certain event or a certain hall, or like where do you want to see your work go? Is what we're wondering.
It's a great question, because I haven't been thinking about it so much. It's to a certain extent, when the curators at Red Cat invited me to do like a kind of retrospective screening of my short films, that just this last year, it was like, okay, I'm there. That's what I wanted.
Right.
Got it. And then also, just a couple of months ago, one of my most recent films was invited to screen at another festival called Fid Marseille, which is a really important film festival in France. I was so gratified to work with them. It was fabulous. I actually cut a French version of A Potentiality because they had just opened the theaters in France, and in Marseille it got to be seen live. Of course, I couldn't get there because he couldn't travel. But the piece, I felt really important that it be seen on a big screen, and it was. And since I knew that only a few French people would be able to go to it, I cut a version in French. So moments like that, it's just like, I would love to keep participating on that level. As a matter of fact, just today I was corresponding with a festival in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, and with the same film, I just agreed and offered to them that I would do a version in Spanish. And the reason being is that this piece has subtitles in English on it already, and you can't add subtitles on top. And then the festivals will go, we'll put subtitles on it, and it's like, no, you can't. So it's easier for me to cut another version in that language than it is to cope with the idea that there's subtitles on it. You know?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess my big aspiration right now is to see whether or not I can pull off this opera. And it's not so much a matter of where things get seen, is that they get made at all, and seen by some people, you know.
Right.
Yeah, I would love to see this this work in a museum setting, actually. Just kind of return to the art world and have more museum representation than just theater representation.
Do you still work with Super 8 medium?
Yeah.
Do you know, like, where did you get that Super 8 camera, or how did you like really get your hands and started working with that?
It's a real specialty, and I learned to work with Super 8s when I was in high school, really, but I taught experimental filmmaking at Otis College of Art and Design for, I don't know, more than 15 years, and I became an expert at buying old cameras on eBay.
Oh.
I'm really good at it. I know these Super 8 cameras, and then I learned how to repair them, because that's so obscure. I can do some repairs, and the same with projectors, with all the equipment, because in my school I had to, I couldn't go through the purchase agent to buy cameras or projectors. I had to find them myself, and then when I got them, I had to learn how to maintain them with the help of the film tech guys at the school. They helped me with that. But nobody in an institution wants to deal with Super 8 or antique camera equipment. I'm sure you're
right.
So you have to do it yourself. And fortunately, I live in Los Angeles, very close to Burbank, where there's still 3 labs that will process Super 8 film.
Oh, wow.
Actually, there's just 2 now. Yeah, I know. so I could just, drive over and bring the students' film to this place. So that's the tricky thing too, is finding places for it to be processed.
Right.
I think Kodak has a deal now where if you can buy, well, they were going to produce a new Super 8 camera, but I think that fell through. But if you guys want to shoot in Super 8 too, you should check with Kodak because they have student discount. You can get 30% off film, and film is really expensive. So check with wherever you could get student discounts like that with film stuff, because it's you wouldn't know otherwise.
Right.
I much prefer shooting in 16, but I also had to teach, and this is not hard to learn. If you can't find a place to process your Super 8, you can do it yourself. It's really not that hard to process your own film. My students would just do it in buckets, like spaghetti. It makes for a really interesting effect,
Right.
Yeah. There's a lot especially in the art world these days, but also in experimental film, there's a lot of interest in handmade, hand processed, and sort of the tactility and hand done film. There's a lot of interest in that. Yeah. I'd only like to add is keep shooting film.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we'll do.
You too. We want to see this opera.
Yes,
I'm so excited for you. All right, I'll be in touch.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
for your support.
It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you.
You too. Take care.
Howdy and welcome back.
We hope you enjoyed that interview with Miss Duff. If you'd like to see some of her films, we've linked her website below.
And we hope you stay tuned for our next webisode this coming month. Thanks and
and
gig
gig
'em.
'em.